The gymnasium buzzed with the electric energy of senior prom night, but 17-year-old Sarah Martinez sat alone in her wheelchair at the far corner table, watching her classmates dance under the twinkling lights. Her designer dresser, a stunning emerald green that her father had flown in from Paris, seemed to mock her as couples swayed to the music she could only observe from a distance. The accident 2 years ago had stolen more than just the use of her legs. It had stolen her sense of belonging in a world that suddenly seemed built for everyone but her. Sarah's father, David Martinez, was known throughout Silicon Valley as the ruthless CEO who had built Technova from the ground up into a billion-dollar empire. His corner office overlooked half of San Francisco, and his decisions affected thousands of employees worldwide. But tonight, watching his daughter's forced smile from across the crowded room, he felt utterly powerless. Despite hiring the best physical therapists, despite donating millions to spinal cord research, despite moving heaven and earth to give Sarah everything money could buy, he couldn't give her what she wanted most: to feel normal again. The other parents nodded politely when they saw him, but their conversations died quick deaths. Sarah's former friends had gradually drifted away after the accident, their visits becoming less frequent until they stopped altogether. Phone calls went unanswered. Social media invitations mysteriously excluded her. The girl who had once been homecoming queen, captain of the debate team, and president of the drama club had become invisible in plain sight. "I shouldn't have come," Sarah whispered to her father during a slow song, her voice barely audible over the music. "Everyone's staring, but no one sees me." David's heart shattered into a million pieces. He had conquered boardrooms and closed impossible deals, but he was helpless against his daughter's pain. "We can leave whenever you want, Mija," he said, using the Spanish endearment her late mother had favored. That's when Jake Thompson appeared at their table. Jake was the school's head custodian, a quiet man in his mid-30s who arrived before dawn and stayed long after the last student went home. He had salt and pepper stubble, calloused hands, and wore his only suit to a navy blue one he'd bought for his own high school graduation 15 years earlier. Most students barely noticed him as he mopped floors and emptied trash cans, moving through the hallways like a gentle ghost. What they didn't know was that Jake had been watching Sarah for months, not out of pity, but out of recognition. He saw something in her eyes that reminded him of his own daughter, Emma, who lived 3 states away with his ex-wife. Emma was only 8, but she'd been born with cerebral palsy, and Jake understood the particular loneliness that came with being different in a world that valued conformity above all else. "Excuse me, Mr. Martinez," Jake said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I was wondering if I might ask Sarah something." David looked up, surprised. In all the school events he'd attended, no adult had ever approached them socially. Jake's presence was so unexpected that Sarah actually looked up from her untouched plate of catered chicken. "Sarah," Jake said, turning to face her directly instead of addressing her father, "I know this might sound crazy, but I noticed you don't have a date tonight. Would you do me the honor of being mine?" The question hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and impossible. Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. Around them, conversation continued, but their little corner of the world had gone silent. What?" Sarah stammered, her cheeks flushing. Jake smiled, and for the first time all evening, someone was looking at Sarah, really looking at her without pity or discomfort in their eyes. "I know I'm just the janitor, and I know I'm older than everyone else here, but I also know that every beautiful young woman deserves to dance at her prom, and I'd be honored if you'd let me help make that happen." David started to speak, his CEO instincts kicking in to protect his daughter from what might be a well-meaning but ultimately cruel joke. But Sarah held up her hand. "You want to dance with me?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I'd like nothing more," Jake replied. "If you're willing to teach an old guy with 2 left feet how to move to today's music." For the first time in 2 years, Sarah laughed, not the polite laugh she'd perfected for her father's business dinners or the bitter laugh that had replaced her joy after the accident, but the genuine, surprised laugh of a teenage girl who had just been asked to dance. "Okay," she said, and the word came out like a whispered prayer. Jake moved behind her wheelchair and asked, "May I?" When Sarah nodded, he began pushing her toward the dance floor. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, and suddenly they were in the center of the gymnasium, under the rotating disco ball that cast rainbow fragments of light across the polished floor. The DJ, sensing something magical was happening, switched to a slower song. Jake positioned himself in front of Sarah's chair and took her hands in his. Then, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the awkward swaying that everyone expected, Jake began to move Sarah's wheelchair in gentle circles, spinning her slowly so that her dress fanned out around her like flower petals. He danced around her chair, sometimes beside it, sometimes behind it, making her the center of every movement. Other couples gradually stopped dancing to watch. But this time, the stares weren't uncomfortable or pitying. They were witnessing something beautiful, a man who saw past a wheelchair to the young woman inside, and a girl who was remembering what it felt like to be graceful again. "How did you learn to do this?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face as Jake spun her chair in a perfect waltz rhythm. "My daughter Emma," Jake said simply. "She taught me that dancing isn't about legs. It's about joy." As the song ended, the entire gymnasium erupted in applause. But Jake only had eyes for Sarah, whose face was radiant with something that had been missing for 2 years, a pure happiness. From across the room, David Martinez watched through tears he didn't bother to hide. This man who owned nothing of material value had just given his daughter something he couldn't buy with all his billions, the gift of being seen, valued, and treated like the remarkable young woman she had always been. The evening transformed after that. Other students, emboldened by Jake's example, began approaching Sarah's table. Conversations that had died after the accident slowly rekindled. The girl who had been invisible became visible again, not despite her wheelchair, but including it as part of who she was. When prom ended, David found Jake in the parking lot, loading cleaning supplies into his beat-up Toyota Corolla. "I don't know how to thank you," David said. Jake paused, a mop bucket in his hands. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Martinez. Sarah's a special kid. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them of that." "What can I do for you?" "Name anything." Jake smiled, the same gentle smile that had lit up Sarah's world hours earlier. "Just keep being her dad. That's all she really needs." 6 months later, Sarah started a non-profit organization focused on accessibility and inclusion for disabled teens. Jake became her first volunteer coordinator, and his daughter Emma became the organization's youngest ambassador via video call from across the country. Sarah's confidence bloomed as she discovered her voice as an advocate, and she began speaking at conferences her father organized, not as the CEO's daughter, but as Sarah Martinez, disability rights activist. The prom photos from that night still sit on David's desk, and not the professional ones from earlier in the evening, but the candid shots someone took of Sarah and Jake dancing, her face illuminated by joy and his by kindness. In a world that often forgets to see past differences to the human heart underneath, One man's simple question had changed everything: can I be your date? Sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another person isn't money or status or solutions to their problems. Sometimes it's simply the recognition of their worth, the acknowledgement of their dignity, and their willingness to dance with them exactly as they are. On that spring night in a high school gymnasium, a custodian reminded a CEO's daughter that she was still worthy of being asked to dance here, and in doing so, he reminded everyone watching what it truly means to be human.